It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me.
Craig, shut up.
Hey, I need you guys to do these things.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump.
So, welcome to another Reality Check with Craig Price. As always, I am Craig Price. And today's guest, we've got Miriam Goodman, who is on to talk about her book, Too Much Togetherness, which deals with some of the unplanned problems people deal with after they retire. We all think retirement's going to be golfing and going on cruises and vacationing and, putting around the yard, but we forget that we've just signed up to be with our spouses, all day, almost every day. And if you're not used to that, it can put a strain on a relationship the first few years while you both try to, figure things out and adjust. But thankfully, Miriam is here to offer some ideas on how to transition just a little easier. And don't forget to let people know about the podcast if you enjoy it. You can always look us up on iTunes and leave a 5-star review. That would be very helpful. If you do not want to leave a 5-star review, do not leave any review. Thank you very much. Also, you can follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle, if that's what it is, it's like CB Talk. Our handle, good buddy, Breaker19, is at Reality Check Pod. And also, you can follow us on Facebook. Look up Reality Check with Craig Price on Facebook, and that way you can share the podcast with your Facebook friends when it comes out every Tuesday. You can just hit share, leave a little note, and they'll be able to listen to it right from Facebook. So if you can do that, I'd certainly appreciate it. Of course, any comments, questions, or suggestions, always email me, Craig at speakercraigprice.com. But enough about that. We're on to our guest today, Miriam Goodman. And I'm glad you're here because my parents I just talked to my mother. She sent me some questions for you.
Okay, good.
Which I knew exactly. The questions that she sent were the exact things I knew she was suffering from.
Okay.
So living with my father is not easy, even in the best circumstances. You take he's a nice guy. He's very funny and outgoing. But also, if you take all the bad qualities that I have and push them to the forefront and then make me, another 20 years older, that's my dad. As far as he's willing to say things that will be obnoxious to people. He's an instigator. How's that? He's more of an instigator. He does it to get a rise from people because he learned that from our grandfather, who would say things like, my sister-in-law was pregnant, and the first thing he did when he saw that she was pregnant is like, man, you are fat, which he knew.
Craig, the question is, you say you're like him. Are you doing anything so that you're not going to be like him in 20 years?
Well, like I said, you take the worst parts about me and amplify them. I do have some of those things, but because I know that exists, I've been kind of swatting them away with a broomstick.
Good. Okay.
My wife may not agree that I'm 100% successful, and I certainly don't admit that. Believe that I'm the easiest person to live with, but one of the things that my mother's noticed, and since they've retired, is that my dad, who used to bicker over little things, is doing so more than usual. My analogy would be it's like the 24-hour news cycle, like CNN. They have so much time to fill. They throw in a lot of people who have irrelevant opinions to argue with each other for an hour in like 2 o'clock in the afternoon because they need to fill time. And I have a feeling my dad is doing the same thing.
That's interesting because one of the things that kept coming up in my interviews was that we don't argue about the little things anymore. A woman will say, for years my husband complained about the way I loaded the dishwasher. He said his way of loading was better. She says, and now, you just get to a point like, okay, fine, don't care, don't argue about it, whatever. So maybe your father needs a little more time and he'll adjust.
We'll see about that. I think it's my mother and my father are both so stubborn, which is, I think, is one of the things that they appreciate about each other. I mean, I think they appreciate that they will take a stand on things, and but before it was only on the weekends or in the evenings because that was the only time my mother saw my dad, and now it is whenever it is. And for those of you listening, I'm here with Miriam Goodman, who's got a great book out called Too Much Togetherness. It's a survival's guide for retiring couples. And we're talking about my parents, which we've talked about in the past on the podcast. But from what I've read through some of the brief things I've seen online about the book, retirement's not as wonderful as it sounds, especially immediately, right? When you retire, it doesn't sound like it's a paradise of relaxation.
Well, it all depends on what kind of person you are. If you've been going at 100 miles an hour throughout your career, and you think that retirement means, okay, I can relax and take my time and do what I want, then it can be a wonderful thing. If you're the kind of person who's always dependent on structure in their life, it can be very hard on you. If you've been told what to do for the last 60 years and all of a sudden you have all that empty time in front of you, it can be daunting and depressing for a lot of people. It really depends on the individual.
And certainly spending more time with someone, especially when you have that structure. Like, I know I'm not even close to retirement. I'm not even 40 yet. But when I see my wife, I see her, I know it's 6 o'clock in that night. We've got a good 3 or 4 hours together before we go to bed. But it's not the moment we wake up until we go to bed that we see each other. And that influx, that amount of togetherness can cause some friction. You got used to only having to deal with that person for a couple hours a day, and now it's expanded 3 times over. That friction can sometimes cause a problem because from what I understand, the divorce rate has gone up for people who've been married for more than 20 years.
That's absolutely true. It has, and it's because people haven't really thought about what they want. The biggest problem, well, let's start with any marriage. People have to know how to communicate. And everyone has their own little system of doing it, and some people do it subtly, and some people do it overtly. And by the time you've been married 30, 40 years, you know what works with your spouse and what doesn't in terms of communication. And what we find is that no matter how successful a couple thinks they've been communicating with each other, somehow they've avoided the whole conversation of what is our life going to be like when we retire. And they think it's going to just happen automatically, and everything it'll be just like when they're on vacation and we're having a good time. And usually on vacation, you're spending a lot of time together. And they think, oh, it'll be easy. And they never talk about it. And it's a conflict because there are these conflicting expectations. For example, in many cases, not in all, in many cases, husbands believe that when they retire, their wives are going to be thrilled. Their wives have been waiting all this time to have them home all the time to do all this stuff together.
Well, I know that is not true in my mother's case. I think she was counting down until, oh my God, he's going to be here.
Well, that's because she realized that he didn't have any other interest in his life except terrorizing her or whatever it is. And that's the problem. I mean, I give examples in my book that a man retired on Friday. On Monday, he woke up in the morning and his wife was getting dressed. And he says, well, what are you doing? Where are you going? She says, oh, it's Monday. It's my tennis day. He says, well, I retired. And she says, yeah. So it was like his assumption, never spoken, never communicated to her, was when I retire, I expect you to be around all the time.
And why do you think that they don't talk to each other? Is it because they're afraid to talk about it?
I think that there are a couple things behind it. First of all, nobody knows what retirement's going to be like. And usually at the beginning of retirement, it is those sort of heady days you referred to earlier where everybody thinks, oh, gosh, I don't have anybody to report to. Everything is so nice. I can do what I want. I can sleep till noon, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? Retirement is saying I'm getting close to the end. And nobody wants to talk about the end. Nobody wants to talk about death. I mean, what comes after retirement? You know,
usually
and I
funeral.
think there's that whole fear that I don't want to talk about this because it means I'm getting old. It means the death is near. So if we pretend like it doesn't exist, well, then we'll be okay.
But I find it odd that you'll hear people in their 30s going, well, I hope I'm retired before I'm 50.
Well, that's because they're thinking about all the things they want to do with all this money they hope that they have. Yeah. I think maybe people who want to retire at 50, and I have interviewed people. I interviewed one guy who it was like in his mind he had a race with his father. His father had retired at 58 or something. So he said, I'm going to do it first. and he retired at 52. And the reality was, and this is what the guy told me, was that he never really was happy working. He was very successful. He managed companies. He did a lot of, if someone would look at his career, they would have said he was successful. But he wasn't happy. He didn't like it. And when he retired, he joined 3 different golf clubs, and he bought 5 timeshares, and those were the things he wanted to do. And his wife was still working, but those were the things he wanted to do with his life. So he was fine because he didn't like what he was doing. Other people love their careers, and they really miss it when they stop. And that's something that has to be replaced. People talk about retirement, and they forget what they got from their job besides money. I mean, money was, for many people, that was the main reason to work. But you also had an instant community at work. These people became your friends. You spent more time with them than you did with your spouse and with your outside friends. This was your community. You also had a purpose. There was a reason that you were doing the work that you were going to do. It didn't matter whether you were a social worker, a teacher, a plumber, whatever it was that you were doing, there still was a purpose, and you knew what was expected of you. And you also had structure. Structure is very important for people. People don't, know what to do with themselves if they don't know, okay, at 9 o'clock I have to be here, and at 12 o'clock I have to be here, and at 5 o'clock I go home. So that's a structure. So all of a sudden you're retired, you have no structure, you have no purpose, and you have no community. And the problem is you have to go back and do it all over again. You have to create that somehow.
And so what do you suggest to, like, in my parents' situation, one was retired much earlier than the other, so they had already got their routine down. So their structure was built. My mother's structure was built early, and then my father's structure came along and disrupted everything. So how can you set those boundaries? How can you, do things so you can maintain that structure? Is there any suggestions on that?
Well, again, it's to talk about it. The best thing is, if the wife feels that her husband is kind of invading what's been her territory for a long time, she's got to tell him, look, I have my friends, I have my exercise schedule, I have my volunteer work, I have these things, I want to keep doing them. Maybe we should sit down and figure out, look at our lives week by week. Let's take out a calendar. I'll tell you what I have planned. You tell me what you have planned, and let's see what we can do together.
And so one of the things that you talk about in the book is how to keep separate yet together lives, how to be separate people but yet still have a life together in retirement.
Well, I think that that's really important because otherwise you're kind of boring to the other person. It's just like the classical, okay, how was your day, dear? Well, if you spend all the day together, you don't have anything to share.
Yeah, by 9 o'clock in the morning, you've got all your day. You've already said everything.
Exactly. So, part of it is, like I said, let's say the woman had other things that she was doing in her life, whether it was taking care of her parents or his parents, whether it was doing volunteer work, seeing her friends, playing tennis, going to the gym, whatever it was. If she wants to keep on doing those things, she's got to do it. And he's got to find things to do with himself as well. So when you say separate, but being separate but also being together, I think it's important that people have separate time together. It makes you more interesting. It keeps you in contact with the outside world, instead of just involved with each other. I can see that just being involved with each other could make people crabby. Like you say, your father, it's sort of finding little things to pick on. Well, if she's not around all the time, or if he's out there doing something else, he's not going to find those things to pick on. So each of you has to find something that interests you, that purpose stuff that I was talking about, and yet find time to do things together. I know a lot of couples start out their day by taking a walk together. So if you're both fit and you can do that, that's a perfect way to start the day. You've spent time together. You can talk about what you're each going to do later, and then get back together at the end of the day, and you're together. But all day, every day can wear on people. At the same time, there are people who are very devoted to each other, and they've been waiting a long time to have this time together, and they want to have it, and that's wonderful. No one's saying that's not a good thing, but everybody needs their own little private space, and you have to respect that for each other and not feel rejected.
And I was looking through the book, and I noticed that it's definitely seems to be written from a female perspective. Obviously, you're a female, so that would be
yes. Well, no, that's not the reason. Is it's written is that I'm a feminist, and I think it's really important that women have to speak up for themselves. And to me, we women of my generation spent a lot of time fighting the system so that we could be accepted in graduate schools and jobs and in places in Congress, whatever it was, in places where we hadn't been in previous generations. And we are kind of used to knocking on these doors and saying, let us in. We're here and we're qualified. So at the same time, I was seeing that women were finding that their husbands, as equal as they had been in the marriage, as much as they had shared in the parenting and everything else, these men retiring all of a sudden forgot that their wives were independent women, and they expected them to act like their mothers. They expected them to sort of fall into place. Well, I'm retiring now, so you retire too, so you can take care of me better. And it was a very strange phenomenon. And so that was why, it seems, it's not that I'm anti-men. I'm just saying women, keep that independence going. It's yours. You don't have to give it up just because you're married.
And I didn't think it was anti-men. I just noticed it was from a female perspective. And my question really to the heart was going to be the differences that you see when a female or a male retires, what their differences is. When the man retires versus when a woman retires, what you're saying is when men retire, they're probably, some of them are looking for more coddling, maybe some more time together, maybe they become a little bit more dependent on the spouse, the female spouse. But I was also wondering how the differences about coping. Are women just easier when they take retirement easier? They're more prepared for it, or what is your perspective?
I have a couple of answers on that. First of all, and this is generalizing, there are always exceptions to the rule, but in general, work is one of the many things that women do. Women multitask much more than men do. So if a woman is working, she is also working in the community somehow, whether she's volunteering or visiting friends. She's probably doing some kind of caregiving, whether it's to his parents, her parents, an elderly aunt, uncle, whatever. She's also the housekeeper, by and large. She's the one who's responsible for getting the meals on the table. All these things in addition to her job. For many men, the one thing they have to do in their life is go to work. So when he gives up that one thing, he's got nothing. When she gives up that one thing, the job, she's still got 17 other things that she's been doing. So it isn't as much a part of her life. Now, again, this is generalizing, and women have been very successful in careers, and they feel let down when they stop working just like men do. But I'm saying for many, many women, the adjustment is a lot easier because they had so many other things going on in their lives, and they haven't given those up.
The percentage of work has only gone down a small portion compared to men. So they're kind of grateful that they don't have to do the 25% work that they were doing because they had all these other things going on.
Sure, that's right.
Now, do you notice in your research that, men, when they retire, since such a large percentage of their life was work, have a tendency to get more depressed and have more troubles in the retirement phase?
I'm afraid so. That is what I have discovered is that men who seem to be happy, the earlier part of their lives, are suffering from depression in greater numbers. Even the mental health the mental health practice in this country is not prepared for how many depressed men there are, because the sort of classic depressed person has always been the woman. And all of a sudden these men, and men present their depression in many different ways. Men, some might be like your father. I'm not saying he's depressed, but getting picky, around other people. That could be a form of his depression.
Yeah, well, he's been picky since before we were born. So,
okay.
all right.
Other men might want to sleep all the time. All of a sudden they're taking naps and they're sleeping later and they're going to bed early. Other men might see themselves just sitting around all the time watching television in the afternoon, which of course they hadn't done when they were working full time. Men are just presenting their depression in different ways. Plus, they're not kind of as socialized to talk about their problems. A woman might go to her regular doctor for just a physical checkup, and if the doctor says to her, "So how things are going?" she might break down right there and start crying and saying, "I'm not happy. Something's wrong. I don't feel right." And her doctor might suggest she go see a therapist. Well, a man's never going to admit that, and so it's really difficult to deal with a depressed man. But by and large, a woman has to look for the signs of depression and see if maybe he needs help. Because I have to tell you, the pharmacological business has become so refined that if somebody is depressed, they can find a pill that really does work. Or if talk therapy doesn't. There are many, many ways to deal with this depression. But, first of all, the man's got to admit that he's depressed and go seek some help.
Well, not only the depression part that can be an issue, this is something that my parents did. And I think having myself as a younger person, having moved quite a bit, I mean, I know how difficult it is to pick up everything and move to another city. I've done it 6 or 8 times where I've moved cross country. And a lot of people, snowbirds, they decide, well, we've lived here in the snow for our whole lives. We've been shoveling. We're old. We don't want to shovel anymore. It's depressing. You can't go outside in the wintertime. We're going to move someplace warm. And I don't think they understand how difficult it is to connect with folks once they go into a place where their whole lives that network has been there. I mean, that my dad has friends when he was 6 that he still talks to, and they still would go to play pool, or they would meet and go fishing and all these things. And then they moved 1,500 miles away, and that network of support is no longer there. How can they find a new network? How can they go find friends when they moved in the retirement, to these new places, these warmer climates where they don't know anybody?
Did they move to a retirement community or just to a warmer climate?
They just moved to a warmer climate, about an hour and a half away from my brother. So they do have a support network as far as the family. They can go see grandkids.
First of all, you've got to be active to do it. It's not going to come to you. This is the main thing. So let's say your parents are bridge players. Maybe they'll put a sign up in the local library or community center or something saying they're looking for bridge players. Maybe they want to do some volunteer work in the schools. That's a perfect way to meet other adults who are doing the same thing. Or they can join a church or a synagogue where they'll meet new people.
And that's the issue that my mother's running into, is that they're not church folk, and they moved into the Bible Belt. And so everybody's and they're trying to find a nice polite way of saying no to church. But yes, we'd love to have dinner with you, but not at church.
Okay. All right. Well, then, find something that they like to do. Let's say your parents like to go to concerts. So there's an intermission at concerts. You got to forget that it's you're adults and it's not like you're on the playground or in the sandbox and 3 years old. You walk up to strangers who obviously also care for that kind of music wherever you are, whether it's jazz or classical or opera or whatever, and start talking to them, make a conversation, or start talking to the person sitting next to you at the concert. Clearly you have that one thing in common. You can build on that. It's very hard for adults to make new friends. That's why I talked about the community that you give up at work. It's very difficult, even if your parents had stayed in the same town. Maybe other friends of theirs they'd counted on for years had moved away. Making new friends is very difficult, but you have to show that you're interested. You have to make that first step. Go out there and do it. I think the biggest problem that I've noticed from the many, many people that I've talked to is a lot of them are going to do volunteer work. And it ends up they do volunteer work where they're needed, which is working with children, working with the homeless, working with the poor and are disabled. And that's a wonderful thing. And I think everyone should do that if they have the interest and the ability and the health to be able to do it. But at the same time, doing all those things, they're not meeting other adults of their same, let's say, intellectual class. So what happens is they find themselves doing all these things, but at the end of the day, they haven't talked to another adult, or they haven't talked to another adult with whom they might have something in common. So in addition to all this good work they're doing, they still need to go out there and make new friends. So join a book group, I would say to your mother. Find a book group. If your father plays golf, tennis, whatever it is, join a gym. A lot of gyms have walking groups. There are places to meet new people, and they're bound to meet people who are new in that town as well. It's not just you.
Well, now that I got all this great free advice from my family, let's move on to people who are not retired yet. And so this is the perfect group so they can start planning how to retire properly, not necessarily financially, but emotionally. I mean, I think my parents were in the same boat as you described. They just thought things would work themselves out. If you are a year, 2 years, maybe at the most 5 years away from retirement, what are some things you can start doing now to prepare yourself and your spouse emotionally so there's a smoother transition?
Well, there's two things that I think we're talking about. How do you prepare yourself for the transition to retirement, and how do you prepare yourself for the transition to too much togetherness? I think those are two issues. But the first thing is you've got to have a plan. And when you retire, you can't just think, I'll retire on Friday, Monday I'll wake up and everything will be lovely. People think cleaning out the garage, taking care of the garden, doing all these things that you've been putting off for years is the first thing you're going to do when you retire. That's not a plan. Those are chores that you've been avoiding because you don't want to do them. That's not a plan. When I say a plan, many people, the first thing they do when they retire is they travel. Okay, maybe that's a month, maybe that's 2 months, maybe that's, 2 weeks, who knows? That's not a plan either. What a plan is, for example, your parents, they plan to move. They did it. They probably started their research before they retired. They looked at the community. Did it have the things that they were looking for? Concerts, lectures, nice weather, golf courses, whatever it is that they want. You have to plan it and see what it is you want. You can't just plop down someplace just because it's warmer. It's got to have something else that interests you. So I know a lot of people have moved to university towns because there is so much culture available in a university town, and they've been very happy doing that. The next thing you have to do is think about that community and what's important to you in terms of your friends. You said your parents have moved 1,500 miles from other people. Talk to other people who are getting near retirement. Maybe some of your friends are thinking of moving too, and move as a group. Maybe 2 couples or 3 couples could move to the same town. So then you have that old familiar friend one place, and somehow it inspires you to make new friends as well.
And that's exactly what they did. There is someone from the hometown who kind of did some recon and had moved down there first. So it's just a matter of that's one person. They just need to go and meet more people. They just can't be afraid to. Exactly. They can go meet their neighbors. And, I found a lot of women that I interviewed had complained that their husbands didn't want to go anywhere anymore. They're out there. They want to go out. The women want to go out and go to this movie, go to the dinner, go to this party. And the guys say, I don't want to go. I don't want to go, because they are mildly depressed. So one thing that I recommend is that you start having people over to your house. No matter how depressed and sort of morose the husband might be, if people come to the house, he's gonna show up, and he's gonna be the good host that he always was. Earlier in his life, he's not gonna go to his room and hide. So invite people to your house. That's one way to get people back in the social world. But it's not easy. That's what I say is the whole problem about retirement planning. People think if you have enough money, that's all that matters. And there's all these psychological changes that are important. And they've been overlooked for too long because nobody prepares you for retirement. There's nobody, when you go to school the first day, it isn't just that first day of school when you meet the teacher. For weeks and months, your parents have been telling you how exciting it's going to be. And your older siblings have said, oh, it's going to be so wonderful when you go to school. And then when you get there, there's somebody to help you. The teacher takes your hand. She takes you over to the table and introduces you to the other children. And you have all that help.
And then probably the same thing happens when you start a new job. There's a supervisor that shows you the ropes, and maybe you have a mentor who helps you. Well, when you get ready to retire, there's nobody to help you. There's nobody to tell you what it's like. And maybe you know some people who've retired a few years before you, and you can ask them the questions. But until now, no one's even thought to ask, and you don't even know what questions to ask. So it's something you really have to. You're in it alone. People can say it's not my father's retirement, but if it's your retirement, you've got to be proactive, and you have to make it what you want it to be.
Well, I certainly appreciate your time, Miriam. The book is Too Much Togetherness, Surviving Retirement as a Couple. And if people want to learn more, because I know you have other books on the subject of retirement, where can they find you?
You can find me at my website. It's called toomuchtogetherness.com. My book is available at bookstores anywhere or online, Amazon, places like that. You can, if your bookstore doesn't have it, they can get it for you in 2 days. It's only $9.95, I should say. It's a paperback book. But at my website, you'll also find an earlier book of mine, which is important for people who don't even know about how to plan and what changes. Should they move? Should they move to a warm climate? How to check it out? That book is called Reinventing Retirement. It's available as an ebook online, or if you go to my website, you can order hard copies from me.
Well, I think both are going to be great. I think you should get the Reinventing Retirement first, and then so you have all the great ideas,
right?
And build the momentum of, hey, this is going to be great, this is going to work out, and then a little reality check, boom, you get the Too Much Togetherness, so they can prepare themselves for some of the obstacles that'll come after all these great ideas that they've got.
Right.
Well,
but the most important thing is talk to each other.
And I absolutely, and that's probably the hardest thing. People think that because they've known each other for 30, 40, 50 years, that, we finish each other's sentences. And it's like, yeah, that's the sentences that are obvious you finished. But the ones that you don't want to talk about, sometimes you really hide things from each other. So,
yeah. And Craig, I just should say, at your age, when you're not quite thinking about retirement, you still should think about what it is that what's your passion? What is it that you would do if you didn't have to work? Maybe you want to play in a rock band. Maybe you want to be a photographer. Maybe you want to write a novel. Well, start doing a little bit of each of those things, maybe once a week, an hour here, an hour there, and find out if it is something that really is your passion, so that when you retire, you know exactly what you want to do.
Yeah, you want to do a little semi-retirement.
Right.
Prep. That's great. That's great advice, especially for people who, like myself, have a long way to go before I retire. And not just because of my age, but just because of the way the world works now. It's getting harder and harder for a lot of people to retire. So,
right.
So I have a long work career ahead of me. So I appreciate you being on the show. Again, they can find you at toomuchtogetherness.com. The book is great. I really appreciate all your insight. I know my parents will be very thankful that you're here, because it's something they really love, free advice. And please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank Miriam Goodman for joining me, but before we go, now that I've listened to the podcast again, I want to make sure my parents are not as bad as it sounded. Are they crazy? Sure. But in a nice, sweet way, and so no phone calls or hate emails. They're really nice folks, and they've been married for like 48 years, so, cut them some slack, and it's not nearly as bad as it sounded. See you next week.